Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are unpacking a really massive Wikipedia dossier on Tikal.
Yeah, one of the most powerful urban centers of the ancient Maya civilization.
Exactly. And our mission for this deep dive is to basically figure out how a sprawling city with absolutely no natural water source, by the way, managed to support millions of people.
Right, and how it survived some pretty brutal foreign invasion.
Yeah, and then how it ultimately engineered its own tragic, toxic doom.
It's quite the story.
It really is. And to set the stage for you all listening, we have to look at this incredible discovery from 2018 in the Guatemalan rainforest. It completely shattered our understanding of this entire civilization.
Oh, it was a massive paradigm shift because, for centuries, our perspective on Tikal was pretty much limited to what archaeologists could, physically uncover with machetes.
Just hacking through the jungle.
Right. We saw these breathtaking stone temples sticking up out of the canopy, and we just assumed those visible monuments marked the boundaries of the city.
Like it was just this isolated ceremonial center.
Exactly. We thought, well, this is it. This is the whole site.
But then researchers deployed LiDAR technology.
Which is just phenomenal.
Yeah, they mount these advanced lasers on aircraft and fire like billions of pulses down through the dense jungle canopy. It digitally strips away the trees to reveal the bare ground underneath.
It's honestly like putting the entire Guatemalan rainforest through a medical X-ray machine.
Right. And when they looked at the scans, they didn't just see, a few extra temples.
No, not at all.
They found 60,000 uncharted structures hidden right there in the immediate region.
60,000.
Yeah. Houses, defensive fortifications, raised highways. The data suggests an ancient population of like 7 to 11 million Maya people living in that region.
And that's during the late Classic period, right?
Yeah, roughly between 600 and 900 AD, when the Maya civilization was really at its peak. So we aren't talking about some jungle outpost. We are talking about a full-blown megalopolis.
And that sheer scale introduces this fascinating geographical puzzle. Because Tikal was built on elevated limestone ridges above these swampy lowlands.
Which means?
Which means if you look at the immediate environment, there are no natural rivers flowing through the city.
Wow.
There are no natural lakes, no underground springs to tap into. They were an upland city completely and utterly dependent on collected rainwater.
Which is wild.
Yeah.
Because you don't support millions of people in a wider region and tens of thousands in the density core just by, hoping it rains and putting out a few clay pots.
Right. You need something much bigger.
Building a civilization there required master-level ecological engineering. The city itself had to be this massive machine for catching and keeping water.
And they did that with the quarries, right?
Yeah. So when the Maya quarried the local limestone to build those towering temples, they were left with these massive depressions in the earth.
Giant holes everywhere.
Exactly. And instead of just discarding them or filling them in, they plastered the porous stone to waterproof them. They literally turned their quarries into 10 massive artificial reservoirs.
That is so clever.
They even paved their main plazas with stucco and built them on a slight gradient. The entire city center was designed as a giant funnel.
So whenever it rained, the water would just channel right off the plazas and straight into these holding tanks.
You got it.
Storing the water is a monumental feat of civil engineering, for sure. But keeping it drinkable in a tropical environment, that is the real challenge.
Oh, yeah, because stagnant water in the jungle.
It normally becomes a huge breeding ground for malaria-bearing mosquitoes, parasite-ridden flies, and, deadly algae blooms.
Gross.
Very. So to solve this, the Maya applied a really sophisticated understanding of wetland biosphere ecology. They actively managed the ecosystem within these reservoirs by introducing the dotleaf water lily.
The dotleaf water lily, scientifically known as
Nymphea ampla.
Right. And the mechanics of how this plant works are just brilliant.
They really are.
The lily has these bluish undersides that physically block sunlight from penetrating deep into the water, which suppresses the algae growth.
And the lily pads provide shade and habitat for the natural predators of insect pests.
Like dragonflies and fish. So that keeps the mosquito population in check.
Exactly. And the roots actively extract excess nitrogen from the water.
Plus, they serve as a biological pH indicator, which I think is amazing.
It is. These lilies cannot survive in highly acidic water, so the Maya actually lined the bottom of the reservoirs with specific clays to stabilize the pH.
Wow. So as long as the lilies were flowering, the citizens knew the water was chemically balanced and safe to drink.
Yeah. And they took that biological engineering even further, Recent archaeological work at a specific site called the Corriental Reservoir revealed this massive filtration system built right into the intake channel.
A filtration system.
Yeah. Researchers found layers of coarse quartz sand and two specific types of zeolite minerals.
Gonoptilite and mordanite, right?
Yes. And these minerals are highly porous. They physically trap harmful microbes, heavy metal toxins, and nitrogenous waste as the water flows through them.
So wait, this is exactly like a giant Brita filter.
It is the exact same principle, and literally the exact same materials we use in modern municipal water purification systems today.
That is mind-blowing. And it strikes me that this isn't just a public utility. I mean, if you are the king providing this miraculously pure, life-saving water in an environment that naturally has none.
Oh, that infrastructure is literally the foundation of your political legitimacy.
Right. The person who controls the water controls the empire.
Absolutely. And the Maya made sure no one forgot that connection. Clean water, the flowering water lilies, and political power became completely intertwined in their ideology.
You see it in the art.
Everywhere. Rulers were constantly depicted in iconography alongside water management symbols. They're often wearing these elaborate headdresses adorned with water lilies.
Wow. So they position themselves as like the essential intermediaries with the gods who brought the rain.
Exactly. But it created a very potent and honestly extremely fragile political feedback loop. The kings claimed divine credit for the water.
Which is great when it rains.
Right. But it meant that when the system failed, like during the severe prolonged droughts we know hit the region, they absorbed all the blame.
Yeah, because that water system required massive centralized coordination. The people running it became immensely powerful, but it also made them giant targets.
Because if you control Tikal, you control the economic engine of the Maya lowlands.
Exactly. And that vulnerability is exactly why in January of 378 AD, a foreign superpower decided to strike.
The political history of Tikal is incredibly volatile.
It really is. So we have the native king, a man named Chaktok Ek, also known as Great Jaguar Paw.
Great name.
It is. And on January 14th of that year, a foreign general arrives from the west. His name is Siash Kalk.
Which translates to fire is born.
Right. And on the very day fire is born, walks into Tikal, King Great Jaguar Paw he dies.
Yeah. The hieroglyphic records are highly sanitized, but the subtext of that quote-unquote death is pretty clear.
Right. It wasn't a coincidence.
Definitely not. Siash Hak was a general representing this mysterious, powerful figure known as Spear Thrower Owl.
And all the archaeological evidence points to Spear Thrower Owl being the ruler of Teotihuacan.
Which was the massive, dominant metropolis located hundreds of miles away in the distant Valley of Mexico. This was a targeted, decisive military intrusion.
It's less like a traditional military conquest and more like, I don't know, a hostile corporate takeover.
That's a good way to put it.
Teotihuacan swoops in, liquidates the local CEO, but they don't rule Tikal directly as a colonial outpost.
Right, they want to integrate.
Yeah. Within a year, they install a new king, a young boy named Yaxnu'un Ahin the Thirst. And this boy just happens to be the son of Spear Thrower Owl.
Convenient.
Very. They install a puppet king, but they keep the original company branding. This is a process you call Mayanization, right?
Yeah, Mayanization. The conquerors were pragmatic. They knew they were foreigners in a radically different cultural landscape.
So they couldn't just boss everyone around.
Exactly. To rule effectively and prevent massive revolts, they needed legitimacy in the eyes of the millions of local Maya.
So what did they do?
Well, it's highly likely this new Teotihuacan boy king took a wife from the pre-existing defeated Tikal dynasty.
Ah, marrying into the power.
Yes. And over generations, these foreign rulers absorbed Maya culture. You can really see this blending on their monuments, like the famous Stela 31.
Saw that one.
The king is carved, dressed in traditional Maya royal regalia, but he is flanked by imagery of his father, dressed as a Teotihuacan warrior.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, carrying a shield bearing the face of Tlaloc, which is the central Mexican storm and war god. Tikal essentially absorbed its conquerors.
That is fascinating. But holding on to that blended power wasn't easy, right?
Not at all.
The region was a powder keg of rival city-states. Which brings us to the 6th century and Tikal's long-running rivalry with another Maya superpower, Galluc. Right.
In 562 AD, an alliance between Calakmul and the city of Karakol inflicts a catastrophic defeat on Tikal.
It was devastating.
Tikal loses its dominance entirely, triggering what historians call the Tikal hiatus. For 120 years, the city goes completely dark in the historical record.
A total blackout.
Yeah, they stopped erecting stelae. You know, those massive carved stone slabs they used to record their history and legitimize the king's divine right to rule?
And to really understand the weight of that, you have to imagine living through a 120-year dark age.
That's a long time.
It's 4 or 5 generations of citizens living in a city that is no longer building, no longer conquering, no longer celebrating its rulers in stone.
It's just stagnant.
The central political engine just sputtered. Regional governors likely gained a lot more autonomy, while the commoners continued to farm the surrounding landscape.
It's trying to survive.
Right. The elite rituals that bound the society together were suspended. We even know from an altar monument found at Karakol that a king of Tikal was likely captured and sacrificed during this period.
The humiliation was profound.
Emerging from a century of silence required a massive show of strength then.
Absolutely.
So in 682 AD, a ruler named Jasa Chan Kwawil takes the throne and orchestrates this astonishing resurgence. He defeats Kalakmul, captures their nobles, and completely ends the hiatus by launching one of the most ambitious building programs in the Americas.
And he had to project absolute, unshakable authority to do that.
Yeah, he mobilized staggering amounts of labor to build monuments like Temple IV, which stands 70 meters tall. That's about 230 feet.
Huge.
And what is wild is that some of these massive pyramids were constructed in as little as 2 years.
That speed is incredible. The logistics of feeding and organizing the thousands of workers required for that construction is just a testament to the centralized power he reclaimed.
Seriously.
But, you know, the temples themselves were often mortuary pyramids. They were built directly over the tombs of the rulers. And the burial practices beneath these structures reveal a really complex relationship with physical power and the human body.
Right, the archaeological finds in those tombs are honestly haunting.
They are.
Deep in the North Acropolis, excavators found burial 85. This tomb likely belongs to the dynastic founder who died in battle long before the hiatus.
Right.
When his followers buried him, his skeleton was missing its head and its thigh bones.
Gone.
Yeah, his body was wrapped up in textiles, and where his head should have been, they placed a small greenstone mask with shell-inlaid teeth and eyes.
And this isn't an isolated practice either.
Right. Burial 48, the tomb of a later king, contained a skeleton missing its skull, its femurs, and one of its hands.
And he wasn't alone.
No, the king was accompanied by the intact skeletons of 2 adolescents who had been sacrificed.
Yeah. This intense focus on mutilating and restoring the physical body is tied deeply to Maya warfare and ancestor veneration.
Like, why take the bones?
Well, in Mesoamerican warfare, capturing an enemy ruler and removing their head or their long bones was a way to spiritually disarm them. It was the ultimate desecration of their power, a way to erase their identity and permanently conquer their lineage.
But then his own people lovingly restore him. They substitute a jade mask for the missing head, wrapping the incomplete body with incredible care.
Exactly. The restoration demonstrates that the physical remains of the kings were the literal foundation of the city's spiritual life.
Because they still hold power.
Yes. The Maya believed that the ancestors continued to influence the world of the living. The North Acropolis at Tikal was basically a layered cake of royal tombs.
A layered cake?
Yeah. Each new king would construct a new temple directly on top of the older ones. They were physically anchoring their current power to the venerated bones of their ancestors.
Wow. So they built this empire on monumental architecture, on the sacred bones of their ancestors, and on a miraculous water management system.
They did.
But ultimately, Tikal's story ends in a cascading tragedy. The very mechanisms that made them great triggered their downfall.
Yeah, it all unravels.
By the 9th century, during a period known as the Terminal Classic collapse, Tikal's population was peaking. Millions of people in the region required massive amounts of food.
Naturally.
Which meant clearing vast tracts of the surrounding rainforest for agriculture.
And that deforestation initiated a deadly environmental feedback loop.
How so?
Well, when you clear massive amounts of jungle canopy, you disrupt the local microclimate. Trees actively transpire. They essentially sweat moisture into the air, which gathers and falls back down as local rain.
Oh, I see.
Cut down the trees, and you physically reduce the amount of rainfall. The soil erodes, losing its nutrients, making it harder to grow food for the swelling population.
So they were systematically dismantling the environment that sustained them.
Completely.
But the killing blow was the water. We talked about how carefully they engineered those reservoirs with zeolite filters and water lilies to keep the drinking water pure.
Right, the ancient Brita filters.
Exactly. But recent molecular and geochemical analysis of the sediment at the bottom of Tikal's reservoirs revealed something awful.
Yeah.
In the final years of the city, the water became heavily contaminated with toxic cyanobacteria, phosphate pollution, and lethally high levels of mercury.
Now, the phosphate pollution makes sense. It was a direct result of overpopulation. As the numbers swelled beyond the city's capacity, human waste and food refuse inevitably washed into the reservoirs, feeding those toxic algae blooms.
Just overwhelming the lilies.
Exactly. But the mercury contamination is a profound tragedy because it was entirely a product of their own cultural practices.
Right, because the Maya considered red a sacred color, deeply tied to the rising sun, life force, and human blood.
Yes.
To visually project this sacred power, they painted those magnificent palaces and 70-meter-tall temples a brilliant red using a pigment called cinnabar.
And cinnabar is an ore of mercury.
Exactly. For centuries, heavy tropical rains lashed those sacred buildings, physically washing the mercury-laced pigment directly down the stucco-paved plazas and straight into the city's drinking water.
They literally engineered an incredible system for survival and then inadvertently poisoned it.
Accidental self-poisoning.
Yeah. And as the deforestation exacerbated regional droughts, the water levels in the reservoirs dropped.
So the poison gets more concentrated.
Exactly, concentrating the mercury and the toxic algae.
Yeah.
The water they desperately relied upon became deadly.
It is the ultimate collapse of the social contract.
Yeah.
I mean, the rulers' divine authority, their entire justification for power, was based on acting as intermediaries with the gods to provide clean water.
So when the reservoirs turned into toxic, algae-choked, mercury-filled pools...
The rulers couldn't fix it.
No, they couldn't.
The people lost faith. The centralized authority completely evaporated between 830 and 950 AD. The final days of the city paint an incredibly eerie picture.
It really does.
By the end of the 9th century, the vast majority of the population had fled. But there were still people there. Squatters moved into the grand royal palaces, building simple thatched huts right in the middle of those ceremonial plazas.
And the archaeological record from this final phase is so striking.
What did they find?
Well, these squatters blocked up doorways in the monumental structures. They left behind domestic trash mixed with instruments used for local ceremonies.
Just living in the ruins.
Yeah, they reused the ancient monuments for their own distinct rituals, completely ignoring the royal history of the site.
Wow.
And the ancestral tombs of the North Acropolis, the very foundations of the king's power, were looted. All reverence for the old rulers and their intricate systems was completely gone.
Just vanished.
By the 10th or 11th century, even those final inhabitants left, and Tikal was completely surrendered back to the rainforest.
You know, it makes you think. Imagine you are living in a modern city today. Think about the infrastructure you rely on daily, without a second thought for you listening right now.
Yeah, it's easy to take for granted.
The clean water coming out of your tap, the electricity powering your home, the complex global supply chains bringing food to your grocery store. We tend to view our technological environment as this permanent shield against nature.
But we aren't immune.
No. Tikal is a stark reminder that no matter how monumental our achievements seem, no matter how clever our engineering, we are always intricately bound to the limits of our environment.
Always.
The Maya built a megalopolis with no water source and sustained millions of people through sheer biological and geological ingenuity, only to trigger a regional collapse when their own expansion outpaced the environment's ability to heal.
It really leaves us with a lingering question to ponder.
What's that?
Well, imagine being one of those final squatters, living in a thatched hut among the ruins of the majestic palaces of Tikal. You're surrounded by the towering temples built by your ancestors, monuments to a golden age you barely understand.
Right.
Did those final inhabitants grasp that their society's collapse was a result of their own environmental missteps of deforestation, overpopulation, and poison technology?
Or did they just not know?
Right, did they simply look up at the polluted, mercury-laced reservoirs and believe the gods had abandoned them? When our own technological fixes eventually fail to insulate us from the natural world, how will we write the story of our own ruin?